We are, well, you can start it right now. We are going to get going. I just want to let you guys know a few things. Please try and stay muted up during the conversation. There is going to be a chance between the speakers. If you really want to say anything or ask anything, for the most part, we're going to leave it as a big discussion at the end. I'm going to ask you guys to stay muted up. Also, come and go as much as you want. I mean, we're all in our normal lives. I don't know about you guys, but when I listen to good talks, I'm often in the kitchen cooking with the computer or the phone there, listening to every word. And so sometimes I have to switch the camera off and stuff like that. And sometimes something comes up and I have to leave. But what I am going to invite you guys, if possible, sorry, I've dropped everything I need. What I am going to invite you guys to do is to try and leave some of your cameras on, because your speakers are quite challenged if they're not really speaking to anybody. And it's wonderful to see all these gorgeous faces that they're kind of interacting with. And yeah, and we've all decided to just flow with the subject we are very passionate about. So we're going to get going, and I'm going to intro us a little bit. And then, as I said, we've got 3 speakers tonight. First one is Shauna, and the second one is going to be Monica, and the third one is going to be MJ. And obviously, we have put together the 3 speakers because they have some very interesting stuff to say on the subject. And they all had one thing to laugh about earlier, was they said they started making notes and got lost and decided, no, they were literally just going to sit with you guys as some friends, and whatever comes up for them, be it 2 minutes or longer, be it long, they're going to share with you what comes up. And I absolutely love that. So the context, I don't know if, I know some of you guys did get a chance to see, I did a talk quite recently about words and the power of it. So I'm not going to go into that or repeat it, but I actually would like to give us a very powerful context. And this incredible context, which I was talking from an Emetic perspective, and I was talking from a Hebrew perspective. And this wonderful lady, Chantal, put this book in my space in the week, and I've been reading that. And also, I don't know if you guys know Rilke, and all of this beautiful stuff. And there's the same thing that we were talking about when we spoke about the Hebrew stuff in my talk, is there's essentially this idea that there is this infinite imagination of God. And in this infinite imagination of God, they created these vessels that would have this beautiful opportunity to birth anything from that chaos that they would choose, and that all creatures in the universe essentially had a blueprint. And we see this in a cricket, and we see this in a bumblebee, and those blueprints in the perfection of the divine would outplay. But along came the archetype of the human, who could access this infinite field and make decisions, as in the beginning was the word, to make a decision what it was going to birth. And what's so beautiful is you see this right across Wiccan, you see this in Hebrew, you see this in all these teachings, essentially that when you cast or say this word, that you make that word, that thing exists before you speak. But if you utter the word such as table, that table exists in even more enormity than it had before. And this interesting relationship that's been discussed for thousands of years, how when you speak of something, you create an energetic link to it. And if you just take that deeply, which I'm not going to tonight, you can just imagine that the things you are speaking about are linking to you in some magical way, and you are creating almost some form of reciprocation of giving and receiving and flow. And it just begins to show us the beginning of how this magnificent construct can happen as we're walking down the road, experiencing completely different things to other people and being empowered by completely different aspects of reality. So it's a very broad kind of magical introduction. But for the most part, where that leaves us now is the practicality of it. And what does that mean for us? What does it mean to take responsibility for what it is that actually comes out of our mouths? And I know it's been a big journey for me, and I know it's one that I feel very triggered by. So I'm looking forward to seeing what comes up. So unless anyone has any questions at this exact moment, we're all going to stay muted up. I'm going to mute up, and we're going to ask Shauna if she is ready to begin to just share some thoughts and ideas with us until she feels that her vessel is empty. and then we will move on. Thank you, Shauna.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, as I said, I'm so honored to be here. I actually should have probably introduced myself when I started off, but I am an integrative life coach and personal development coach. And as you can imagine, words play an enormously powerful part of the process in coaching people and understanding their internal realities and, yeah, just terms of shaping the entire coaching process. But words have always just held such a massive important part of my life. I'm also a songwriter and a singer, and yeah, it's just the amount of meaning that one word can contain and the amount of ideas that one word can allude to in terms of concepts and constructs is just always held such immense power. But yeah, when Nathan first asked me to speak and told me the title of the talk was The Power of Words, the first thing that came to mind in thinking about that in terms of the profound and kind of transformative power that words contain is I just kind of thought back through history on the amount of like countless poets and artists and authors and speakers and the amount of speeches that have been told, and yeah, just the language that is used within those contexts and how they've had a profound impact on us that's kind of transcended time and space. We only have to kind of think of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech and the influence that that's had to kind of uplift and inspire. So there's no shortage of examples of how the power of words has kind of impacted us throughout the years. But yeah, one of the things I wanted to mainly speak about today specifically is the context of how the words that we've heard in early childhood have come to shape our identities, shape our beliefs, and kind of yeah, project our internal representations onto our lives. Yeah, so I mean, to begin with that, in childhood, our minds are kind of like sponges, and all of the words that our parents, teachers, peers, whoever it is that has come to influence us, the words that they speak to us become ingrained beliefs in our minds. And whether those words have been encouraging or discouraging has a profound impact on shaping our own reality and shaping the narratives and the stories that we tell ourselves. I mean, I was recently working through the artist way, and there's this amazing activity where she talks about having your Monsters Hall of Fame and having what's it, the Monsters Hall of Fame, which is basically just any kind of criticism that you received around your creativity, whether it was somebody that told you, like you can never make a success of a career as an artist, or you could never do that, or that's a silly thing, that's a hobby, it's not something you should take very seriously. And likewise, you have to find the kind of ambassadors of your creativity, or she calls it the champions of your creativity. And all of the words at certain moments in time where you felt completely and utterly supported or cheered on. And what I found so impactful about doing this activity was it was so clear as day that I could memories for each of those. They were very, very stark images, and the importance of this felt that the impact of these words and the emotion that it evoked got carried through years from childhood till now. The words that are spoken to us when we're young, they stick. And I mean, part of this is through the process of the formation of the default mode network, which in my understanding is just the neural network and kind of the reinforcement through repetition. So the things that are told to us over and over and over, whether it's our beliefs about money, our career, who we are as people, if we're told, I mean, on a personal level, if you're told you're too deep, or you think too much in a certain way, or you overthink, or the things that we're told about who we are become embedded beliefs, and they shape our self-esteem, they shape our narratives around ourselves. And what ends up becoming extremely difficult is through this reinforcement and this repetition. We kind of have an embedded kind of neural network. And whenever we kind of, our minds are absent and we're not necessarily focusing on anything, we automatically go frame whatever it is we're thinking about, whether it's ourselves or our circumstances or our past or any kind of beliefs we have around our future, contain these messages within them. And yeah, it can be extremely hard to then break out of this mold. But I think one of the most beautiful things that I work with in coaching is kind of helping people to understand the neuroplasticity that exists within our brains and the ability that we have through words to reshape our narratives, to change our beliefs around who we are. That none of these things are actually facts. None of these things are truths. They are our subjective realities. They are the internal narratives that we have taken upon ourselves, not necessarily directly, but just through repeated narratives. And yeah, I mean, the beauty that comes through with this and with the work that I do and that I love to see within clients is through the power of positive self-talk, we're able to completely and utterly uproot limiting beliefs and shift our narratives completely. It takes an immense amount of consistent effort to rewire our thinking around these kinds of concepts. So for instance, I mean, if somebody told you when you were younger that you're too deep, you overthink, this is that you're lazy or whatever it is, those are kind of ideas that are embedded. In order to uproot those things, it takes almost writing down all of your beliefs around yourself and having to identify that language, becoming aware of what it is that we say about ourselves, and then actively choosing to write out or see and choose a different and new empowering belief. So through our own words and through the words that we choose on a daily basis, we get to shift our narrative. So our words hold immense power in that regard. And something else I just wanted to say on that was the power of the reticular activating system. So, I mean, I'm sure everyone, or maybe not everyone, is familiar with the reticular activating system, but it's basically part of a neural network that it's our filtration system. So I mean, considering we have thousands and thousands of pieces of data, or millions of pieces of data that come into our awareness, or at least into our space and into our environment, in order to construct a reality where we can actually make sense of all of this information, our reticular activating system basically seeks out the information that it finds evidence for to support our beliefs. It basically, if, for instance, if we believe that, or if we have thoughts around the fact that we are lazy, we could do about 10 productive things in a day, but our reticular activating system will focus on any time that we took a break, any time that we did something, and it'll find any evidence to kind of support the narrative that this is who we are. So that's, I mean, within that kind of construct lies, well, our demise if we leave it kind of unconscious and we don't draw attention to it. But if we bring it into our awareness and we bring those negative thoughts and beliefs and words into our awareness and change them to the positive and find, for instance, decide that we're going to have new and different empowering beliefs around finding evidence for the fact that we are productive, or the fact that that creativity is a worthwhile pursuit, to just basically, yeah, reconstruct positive beliefs around ourselves. When we consistently address those every day, whether it's through checking in with our language, and one of the powerful ways I often do this with clients is to set about like 3 different alarms in the day, and to reread new and empowering beliefs, and to just constantly, reaffirm these new statements. So essentially, we can make our reticular activating system work for us, just through a process of rewiring, but it takes consistent effort, it takes conscious awareness, and it takes a lot of repetition. The same thing that actually created the beliefs is the thing that can be its undoing. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say on the subject.
Thank you, Shauna. Thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, your overview and your explanation of it turns it very personal for me, because I found myself listening to you and actually becoming aware of things that happened to me. I mean, I'm not sure how many people experience this, but as I said, as you were sharing, I often have a sentence running in my head for the good or for the bad. And it fascinates me how it's not just a negative thought, it's a sentence. I even sometimes find myself wording the sentence over and over, almost in an OCD thing. And of course, when I'm in a difficult space, that can be so destructive. And the other thing that you were making me think about is, I know it's a very strange thing to bring up a series, but there is a series on Apple at the moment called Physical, and it is about a lady that essentially is an aerobics teacher. It blew me away. The entire series, it's about the voice in her head and essentially like what she empowers and what you were talking about with your system. You literally just explained like a lot of what she was experiencing in the actual visceral. So if you guys ever want to check it out, it's literally like watching the entity of thought inside someone's head and the war that they're at it, and about how ugly we are or how much we eat or what we look like, and you literally explained the war that she tries to turn over and turn into her own side. So I thought it would be interesting just to share with you guys that I really do feel that destructive side in myself sometimes. It seems to be very momentum based for me. So like whenever I switch to one direction, if I'm very negative, it's very hard to turn it around. And once I do, wow, once you're feeling on top of the world, it's very powerful, beautiful. So I think we've got off to a very, very interesting start here. So we're going to ask, unless anyone has anything they need to address for now, as I said, we'll have a discussion at the end. I'm going to ask that Monica please unmutes for us and continues the discussion in any way that feels fit for her. Thanks, Monica.
Thank you, Seana, for that interesting talk. I was jotting down some of the words that you were using, because I have a very guilty secret when it comes to words. I very seldom talk about it, but it's a very big part of my life that has to do with words. I collect words, and I began to collect words when I was in primary school. But it was much rougher then in those days, where I would keep a piece of paper and write words that I liked and wanted to remember. And then about 10 or 12 years ago, I began to collect words seriously. And I think it comes quite close to being an obsession. There is nothing I do that I don't enjoy more than collecting words. And I have thousands of words now, all in English. That's my language. And it has astounded me as the years have gone by they're all organized in alphabetical order. It's like my own private dictionary, no description of the word, just the words. And I know the meaning of every one of those words. I wish I could show you the pages and pages, dozens of pages of lists of words in alphabetical order. But they're a kind of a poetry, because once you take random words and you then sort them, which we can do automatically now, we don't have to do it manually, they become a poem. And I've even had a few people, every now and then I post one as a section, a small little sample of a collection of words from the words. And then I hear from people, especially the journalists, they say just reading those words that are all of them interesting. I don't have any boring words in my thousands of word collection. And how reading the words that have been randomly selected from my own reading, that's the randomness. It's something I read, and then, or I hear a child say something, or in a conversation, and I think, oh, I've got to save that word. I was saving words from you, Seana, things you were saying. And the words come together in this random way, and they take on a form of, I don't know what to call it, but magic. And not so long ago, I found an article written about Shakespeare and Shakespeare's writing. And the fact that most of our writing in the English language, especially the literature of English language, ultimately somehow goes back to Shakespeare. And I don't even know how many hundreds of years ago he lived. And yet he's had such an impact on our lives. So someone had, a group of word scientists had done some research on Shakespeare's writing, and then did brain tests with people reading Shakespeare. And when I read this, I got so excited, because that's exactly what happens for me. Shakespeare combined words in unusual ways. So he would use a noun and turn it into a verb, or vice versa. He did not stick with the rules of the English language, which I feel quite strongly about. And I'm trying to loosen up on that, because Shakespeare didn't worry about that too much. And somehow he knew that if he put this word with that word, it triggers something in your brain that takes you to another level. And that was, I think, my original attraction to words from when I started learning to read. That if I heard words put together, they would trigger something in my brain, and I'd go into a little psychedelic experience almost, just because of the combination of the sounds of the words. It's really worth becoming aware of that, because for me, it practically runs my life now. It's so important in my life. And if I ever get to retire, I think I will just work only on my collection of words, because that's what gives me the most pleasure. And the second thing that gives me a lot of pleasure is writers. I was interested, Herman, that I think it's you that started writing. Is that right? And I have always been fascinated by writers. And I was a very early reader. I started reading very, very young and very prolifically. And I used to think about these people who'd written the books. I mean, one of my heroes for a long time was Enid Blyton when I was very young. And I even got a crush on one of the people in the stand in those famous five. It was my first little crush with, I think his name was Peter. Someone called Peter in the famous five. That was the power of those stories that Enid Blyton was writing, which was ultimately became even more interesting when I became much older, and I discovered that actually her inspiration for her stories came from psychedelic mushrooms, which I knew nothing about in those days, and which now, of course, is a big part of my life also. And so with this interest in writers, do you know how powerful writers are? One person, all by himself or herself, sits alone, very often in the early hours of the morning, writing. Nobody knows who they are, what they're doing, what they're writing about. The book gets published, it goes into publication, and it's a lot has changed these days. It can be published in so many different ways now. And people who don't know each other, maybe hundreds, thousands of people read the book. None of them know each other. None of them know that author, nor does the author know them. And lives are changed in this mysterious way of reading what someone was writing. And out of that, that interest in writers and how they do that, I started up a Facebook page called Writers World, which has now got almost 11,000 members around the world. Because I think at the time that I started that Facebook page, I thought to myself, I think that everybody has a little secret wish in themselves to write a book or an article, but it's inborn in us to be able to express ourselves with words, because words are magic and combinations of words trigger stuff. I think there's a therapy we haven't discovered yet that has to do with just hearing the combination of words and what they do in our brains. So, of course, naturally, that took me on to thinking about my own history with words. Do any of you here perhaps know what your first word was that you ever spoke? I don't. I don't know what my first words are, but I know what my two children, their first words were. I mean, those were first tiny little baby steps into this language of words. We all began with the first word. And then I had 2 days ago, had like a crashing into a brick wall reminder that there's also the last words. And I got a call. I don't want to go into the long story of it because it's terribly sad, but a very dear friend of mine took his life a couple of days ago. And we worked together, we kind of colleagues in the work that we do together. And his girlfriend phoned me because he was sure that he'd gone missing. And so she phoned me to ask if I had talked to him lately because he's just vanished. And I got a little horrible feeling in my heart because I knew how depressed he was. And she phoned me back about 15 minutes later, completely hysterical, crying and saying, "He's gone, Monica, he's gone, he's gone, he's dead." They had broken into his house and found him, and he had taken his life. And that's when words came up for me. And I kept thinking, what was the last time I heard his voice? And I wanted to hear his voice. And what did we talk about? I went on to WhatsApp and I looked at our last conversation, which was a day or two before his death, and saw what we talked about, not anything very deep. And those words became they're just words, but those words were given such power. And my last words to him, which he didn't reply to because I didn't know he was already dead, were, "Are you coming through to Somerset West soon?" Because I was hoping we could get together and meet. So the first words and the last words are terribly important words in our lives. And learning to read. I mean, how many of you remember learning to read and to write? I was lucky enough to grow up on a mission station at that stage in my life. So there was a little mission school, and my grandmother was the teacher at the school. So I was taught by my grandmother to read and to write. And she was pretty strict, very lovingly, but she wouldn't let me get away with not writing on the line and doing a word wrong and that kind of thing. But all of us learned to read and write, essential life skills. If we have battled to learn to read, any child that can't read fluently and with confidence has a serious handicap. And we take it so for granted that it's just a skill that we can all have. And then taking that ability to read and translating it into writing it ourselves, and little kids in school, that we sit in the classroom and we start writing our own words. I had my first teacher at school after I was homeschooled at the mission for a long time, but finally went to a tiny little public school in a little village in what was then Rhodesia in the mountains. And I was terrified of the teacher because she had this idea that I was a really stupid, backward child. And I wanted to impress her that I wasn't so stupid as I looked. And so one day she said, by the way, the whole school was one classroom, from kids who started school all the way up to the end of what was then Standard 5. We were all in the same class. So the teacher was having a hard time, I think. But I remember her saying, who knows the meaning of the word kid, K-I-D? Well, of course I knew that. And I was the youngest in the class, and I put my hand up, so proud that I would know. And she said, what does it mean, Monica? So I said to her, a kid is a small child. And she came and whacked me on my hand with her ruler, and she said, no, it's not. It's a baby goat. I'd never heard that a kid was a baby goat. A kid for me was, my mom would call us, come you kids, come now for supper. And so kids were small children. So I got into trouble then for being so sure I was right when I was wrong. And she and I had another fight about spelling, because learning to spell all those words, how amazing are our brains that they can take in thousands of words, all those words that I'm collecting, literally thousands. I think it's like 10,000 words. I know the meaning of every single one of those words. And you have something like that too, that you know so many words. But my spelling, I used to battle with my spelling. And then she said, the teacher, she says, who knows how to spell the word friend? So up went my hand. I know how to spell friend. It was the f-r-e time. So she said, how do you spell friend? So I said, f-r-e-n-d. Whack on my hand again. That's not how you spell friend. She said, you spell it F-R-I-E-N-D. And I said, no, you don't. It hasn't got an I in it. Well, was I punished for trying to tell the teacher how to spell the word friend? And I could not understand that, because the spelling of friend to me was the most obvious thing. If you knew your phonics, you could spell the word friend. So those are little memories that came to me while I was thinking about this, how words came into my life and became so important, even though they were traumatic times. And one of the ways that words show up also, especially, I mean, they have for me in the most beautiful of ways, is poetry. And that brings in the Shakespeare thing I mentioned earlier on, that poetry somehow combines words together that trigger connections in our brains. They take us into another almost sacred space. And I had an amazing experience with writing an extremely short poem at UCT summer school. I was attending a summer school class, a poetry writing class, and we were sent out into the grounds to go and sit on a bench or on the grass somewhere and just write a poem in half an hour and bring our poem back. And that's not a nice way to write a poem. You can't, I felt you've got to be inspired to write a poem, not just go with an intention, a practical intention, to go and sit and now write a poem. But anyway, that's what we were told to do. And I found a bench there at UCT where you sit high up and you look over the whole of Cape Town into the sea beyond. Beautiful view. And I was sitting there thinking, what poem can I write? And then I looked at my feet, and there were tiny, tiny little dandelions growing. Not the big ones, but minute little dandelion flowers. Little yellow flowers, and then those fluffy seed, whatever you call them. And this poem popped into my head complete. I wrote, it's not long, and I'm not going to even read it to you. That's not the point. I want to tell you what happened with the poem. That poem came by instant inspiration. I can't claim that I wrote it. But that poem, I think it's 27 words long. That's all. It has appeared in poetry books around the world. It's called The Way Dandelions Think. And it is about thinking dandelions. Because as I looked at these baby dandelions at my feet, what came to me was, nobody ever plants and farms with dandelions, yet they're all over the place. Nobody cares about dandelions, but they just keep on growing. That's what the poem is all about. And the poem is I can't even remember all the places it's been published. I get questions for permission to publish this little poem about the thinking dandelions. And it's been published in a German poetry book. It's in one of the South African newer poetry books. It's on a website that's called South African Poets. Now, I've never thought of myself as a South African poet, but this little poem popped up there. Oprah magazine contacted me to ask if they could use the poem. You see the power of words? And out came that Oprah magazine, a double spread for 27 words with beautiful pictures of dandelions. So I've never tried to market it. I mean, what would you do with 27 words of poetry that came in a flash? But it gave me so much to think about, that if we can loosen up, or if I can loosen up my mind, that I'm not trapped in an expectation of now to have to do something perfectly and beautifully. And I looked at that beautiful view across the sea and the city, and next thing, there were these little dandelions at my feet. And out came this amazing experience for me of this poem that was a little sentence, actually, about how dandelions think. And if we could tune into that magic of words, and be able to use it. They also said in the research I referred to, that they think that there's a special development that happens in people's brains when they're really tuning into words all the time. So I must have an amazing brain by now, because big chunks of my life are taken up with words, literally just words. These thousands and thousands of words that I've listed, that are, every single one of them is so beautiful. And you know that for all those words, those thousands of words, and all the words in every book, in every English library in the whole world, they're all made up with only 26 letters of the alphabet. Nothing more than that. So much writing, so much knowledge, so much beauty. Just 26 letters of the alphabet. And just to go a bit deeper than that, every letter of the alphabet has an ancient history. You could write, I'm sure there must be a book somewhere about just the letter A. How did we get the letter A? Alpha and Omega, the letters of the alphabet themselves are amazing in their history. And yet all of us here and all around us, we have learned how to use those words. We know the alphabet. We know how to write. We have some measure of level of expression of words and literature and poetry and the beauty of the combination of words. The fact that almost everyone is able to learn to do that. I could honestly rattle along, and I've got so much to talk about here, and I'm not going to say anything more other than just that. Think about your history with words. Go back as far as you can, learning to read, learning to write, memorize. I mean, I don't think kids memorize anymore. I memorized poems. I was very big on reading the Bible when I was a kid. I memorized whole chapters of the Bible, especially this book of Isaiah, if you know that book. And those exercises I did with my mind are so valuable for me now, because I can remember them still, and they become part of my own writing. I find myself writing something, and I've written something that I memorized out of some poem or something from when I was still at school. So that's a very practical perception. I mean, it's not anything very complicated or anything very academic, but tracking back, how did you grasp the wonder of words. You, all of you here now, must have some sense of that. That's why you're here. That you are caught up in the wonder of words too. And we have this potential of variety with the words, where we can say the same thing with several different words. And then we look to see which is the most perfect word to use. I mean, I'm not going to let myself go on and on, because I've got so much to say about words. I must stop. You have to stop me, Nathan, because if I'll keep on forever, we won't get to bed tonight. Or so I'm not going to say more, but I have a little seed of to grow what's already growing in you. The wonder of words, the magic of words. And when you ravel them all up together, you increase the magic, because the combinations are like a magical witch's brew when you start to mix a whole lot of words up. And they don't have to make sense. They will make their own sense, but you don't have to make sense of it. And test it a little bit to see how the magic of words affects in that moment, your thinking. I really am going to stop. I don't know how long I spoke. I'm sure it was too long.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Monica. I'm absolutely loving this. I don't know about the rest of you, but once Shauna and Monica have spoken for a while, I'm excited to even write a paragraph, which is kind of what I was hoping. It's making me not only just feel the scientific side and the possibilities, but it's also making me feel a little bit of a child wanting to play. And yeah, I'm feeling the magic rising. So yeah, what a beautiful conversation. So thank you guys, both of you, for sharing. So we're going to ask our last speaker to share whatever arises for him, or whatever his thoughts are on a very, very broad subject. And yeah, once he has completed speaking to us, I will share any closing thoughts, and we can open up for any thoughts, shares, or discussions at the end. Thank you, MJ.
Thank you, my brother, and thank you, Monica. That was amazing. I was really riding each of your words and really, really enjoying it. It was like the tantra of words.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm also just gonna feel my way into this conversation. My name is Himjay. I'm a coach and a medicine facilitator. And essentially what I would call myself is a story healer. I've been working with story all my life. I've been working with stories since I was 16 years old. But really the story in the sense of spoken word, of expression, of the expression of word. I worked in theater for most of my life before I started moving into coaching work and transformational work. But it's always been about stories, the stories we tell that ultimately shape our lives, and the way we tell those stories, and the stories that we take in, the stories that shape us, and the way that we shape the world. So where my interest really lies is empowering the author in us, empowering, and not just the author of fiction, the author of our actual lives, because we're literally speaking our lives into creation all the time. And so, I mean, there's so many spiritual practices now, especially in our modern age, that is all about the ability to manifest and speak our reality into being. We're becoming very, very conscious of this superpower that we have, the scepter that we hold to virtually create our reality, and not just our reality around us, to impact our actual biology, to impact our relationships. And it's all through the words that we use, the nature of the words that we use. I've got a little 2-year-old girl who's literally learning language and she's picking up everything, and everything we're saying is soaking into her, and her paradigm and the way she relates to the world is all coming from these words that she's learning, and how she's stringing them together to form a narrative of who she is and what her life is about. And so that's really the part that interests me, is how we string the words together into these sequence of events. So when my daughter has an experience, she's now able to like talk about, oh, that time where she was there and she bumped her head, and what it meant for her, and what she felt, and what it means for her. And slowly, as she strings these events together, she is forming a story. She is forming a journey, which is essentially what a story is. The story is, when we speak about our own personal stories, it's the map of our lives, because there are so many events that happen in our lives, and we choose particular ones, particular moments that are defining for us, and we forget the others, and we string them together to create the sequence of events. And it's exactly how you'd make a play and how you'd make a movie. You choose the most pertinent events to string together to create a narrative that has peaks and ebbs and flows, that has conflict, that has everything, and that ultimately gives us meaning. Stories is what ultimately gives us meaning. And so I've spent a lot of my life telling stories and making up stories to change people's minds. And then really I got interested in the stories that we tell ourselves and the stories that shape our lives. So I'm very interested in grappling with the scepter of words that we use to define ourselves and our relationships. So the phrase, there's a song that I wrote, and the line goes, "What is the recipe for the sacred reciprocity between the universe and I?" And it's all through the words. How are we creating our words through, how are we creating our realities, our experience through our words? So yeah, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in empowering people to become, and this is the beautiful term, conscious creators in their lives, that they're actually creating consciously. And we start to become aware that the words that we use, the way that we define our experience. So for instance, it's raining, and some people will go, it's dreadful weather, it's so depressive weather, you know what I mean? And already they've defined the experience just by uh, giving giving the weather a meaning, or and so they'll have either an expansive experience of it, which means they'll enjoy it and open up to it, or there'll be a sense of contracting. So stories for me is really has two powers in terms of the scepter that we hold. We have the power to destroy, to break things down. And that's essentially kind of what we call negativity. We bring things in that can like break something down, break an experience down. And we have things that can build things up. And in a sense, we kind of understand that in the spiritual context as positivity, like we bring like a positive energy to it, and in that we create expansiveness, we open it up, and we have all experienced that. If we're sitting with somebody who's telling a story and they're really like just going to the negative, to the victim aspect, and you can feel that energy just pulling in and contracting, that's the physical experience that you have. And then the same person could be telling a story, or even the same story, but in a completely different way, as a learning experience or whatever it is. And even if it's a difficult story, it can open up, it can expand like a flower, it opens us up. So that really is the power of storytelling. And like I say, that's what I'm interested in. I'm interested in empowering us to become authors of our lives, so that we really start speaking our dreams into existence and do it in a very, very powerful way. So that's kind of like a broader context of what I'm interested in, and what I work with people. But while I was preparing this, I was uh, wanting to share what I am personally grappling with. So I'm speaking specifically about the idea of manifestation, the power of word, the power of language, but specifically about manifestation. Once we get this awareness that we can manifest and create. And it's always interesting that you hear people are willing to take responsibility when they manifest something great in their lives, like a job or money comes in, they go, wow, I manifested that, I attracted that in. But when a relationship breaks down or something terrible happens, we're not inclined to grasp that responsibility and say, I brought that in, I made that happen. Wow, look, see how powerful I am. Then it suddenly becomes, these people are messing with me, and this force is kind of messing with me, and so on. It's amazing how we don't own the whole thing. That even the difficult things that we bring into our lives, even misfortune, still is an aspect of our own ability to manifest. So that's always an interesting thing. But I want to get to what it is that I'm personally grappling with. and it's just in the realm of spiritual, specifically around spirituality and spiritual community, where positivity and positive language, there's a thing called toxic positivity. There's a specific occurrence where there is a thing called toxic positivity. Just as negativity can be quite toxic, there is also this thing as toxic positivity. It was a few years ago that when I was really new to the space of coaching, and I was working, my wife and I were working with a couple, and the 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 guy, the husband in the couple, he had just discovered Abraham Hicks, and he was just fully into it, absolutely, like, just, he was eating it up, the power of attraction and being in a high vibration, and really only speaking positively and noticing only positive things. And his wife was wanting to do work and speak about difficult things that she was really wanting to, like, get into the difficult experiences that she had, and he kept shutting her down. He kept just going, I don't want you to speak about these things, I don't want you to bring it up, you must only focus on positive things. And it was so clear how toxic that was, that she wasn't given the space, and in terms of their connection, to go and do the difficult work, to acknowledge the difficult things that she needed to acknowledge, that this quest for positivity had almost kind of blocked her off completely from being able to do that his work. And that he was this textbook case of what you would call spiritual bypassing, where he was not dealing with what was concealed and what was going on within him, you know. And so it was just such a beautiful example of positive and affirmative words and concepts not being used in a powerful way, or missing something out completely. And so much of my journey has really been about, how do we create powerfully in this world and acknowledge and express what it is that we need to express. And this has really been my journey as an artist. I'm going all over the place, so I hope you're just picking up on where this train of thought goes. I don't even know where it's going. But it has to do with this journey that I've been on, where initially, for the first part of my journey, I've been an artist, really an artist who's spoken into and expressed things that troubled me about our society, about relationships, about people. And the platform that I used was a theater stage, was to speak about the things, or to mirror to the audience the things that I had issues with, that I felt needed to be transformed. And at that point in my career and in my work, I saw the artist as somebody who expresses, who mirrors and shows things to the world. And there's been a huge shift in my journey, just in terms of believing that an artist is just somebody who expresses something, who just if I tell a story, or I tell a story of difficulty or woe. I mean, what got me into it, it's interesting, Monica, that you speak about Shakespeare. You know, Shakespeare, the line from Hamlet, you know, he says, the play is the thing in which we catch the conscience of the king. And that was really what it was for me. It was about cornering people's their conscience. It was about, you know, and I created plays that really shook people up and rattled them very, very hard. And there was a particular point in my life when I started shifting my focus away from wanting to change the world and wanting to change people around me, and I started looking at myself. Something really in terms of my whole relationship to stories and the expression of stories, where I began to realize that we're not just expressing something when we put something, when we express something to the public. We're actually creating realities. We're actually manifesting realities. I mean, you think about how certain movies about that are just expressions of certain cultures, whether it's gangster cultures, has actually exacerbated those cultures in the world. Where the artist would go, I'm just speaking about the realities of how I grew up in the street, and yet that has actually exacerbated and compounded that into the world. And it just brings to light, like, productions that I've been in, productions about gender violence, about racial violence, that in though the intention was good to express something, it actually compounded it into reality, because there wasn't this awareness that as artists, we're not just expressing, we're actually creating. We're creating reality. And that really shifted something for me. And that's actually what shifted me out of theater and storytelling, because I began to realize we are getting so powerful with our words and our ability to impact people's minds and hearts, that our words are actually not just conversations and dialogues. They really are creating. They really are creating the world. And that's what took me out of theater and started bringing me into the space of actually sitting with people's actual stories and starting to break that apart and really understand, like, how do we take charge of this world that we live in, that we're not just expressing and mirroring the world, that we're actually taking responsibility for the world that we live in and the world that we're constantly creating, because we are constantly creating this world. And it's really then, understanding the bigger picture, the spiritual picture, why we're here, what are we here to do, what are we really creating. We're doing something more than just trying to untangle this web. There is a bigger picture of what it is that we're here to do. And it's shifted so much for me in terms of the stories that I tell, and particularly the songs that I write, because so many songs sit in my head through that I've listened to throughout my life. And Monica, you speak about poems and the way that they impact you. Think about all the songs that you've ever heard, songs about pain in relationship, broken hearts, all these things. These have literally shaped the way that we experience things and the way that we relate. We bring it into our relationships. Artists have really actually shaped our world and are infinitely more powerful than we can imagine. And it just has me realize that, especially in this day and age now, where we are manifesting so fast, that we really start taking cognizance and control of what it is that we're actually manifesting, because we're doing it so fast, whether we're manifesting positively or negatively or unconsciously or consciously. That is the thing. It's happening. I mean, you just look at what's happening with AI. People are literally imagining something, speaking a request, and it is literally being created as we speak. And so the state that we're in, our spiritual state within our beings, our sense of connectedness, becomes so vitally important, because our inner world is expressing so quickly into the outer world. Whereas decades before, it took a long time before an expression or a thought came out into the world. Now it's happening in an instant, and it's going to happen faster and faster. And that, for me, is why it's so important that we all become literally spiritual. We become the authors of our lives from a spiritual context, from an emotional context. Yeah. I went completely off what I planned, but this really does speak to me, for me, about why the coaching work that I do, why plant medicine is so important, because just the experiences that I had with that, I mean, I've been in coaching organizations and transformational organizations, but the ability to have the physical experience of seeing the bigger picture of my reality, of being able to literally stand at the mountaintop of my existence, has reshaped the way and the cosmology of my narrative. And in so many respects, this is so important, that we not only take responsibility for our words and how we create, but that we start to really see the bigger picture of who we are as these magnificent authors with the scepter of language that we have, whether it's in poem, whether it's in song, whether it's in the books we write, whether it's in the speaking that we speak to, the way that we speak to our children, or the way that we speak to our partners, or the way that we speak to each other in the world. I really believe that now is the time that we really need to be 100% responsible for what it is that we're creating. And I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I know I had a lot to say, but that feels like a full stop for me. Yeah.
Thank you, my brother. Sure, you guys have blown me away here. I'm finding it quite hard that you guys didn't, to believe that you guys didn't plan this. Shauna has given us this magnificent overview, and then almost as though it's planned, Monica and MJ have just got deeper and deeper on a personal level, making it extremely applicable, because I've been making notes here, but mostly it's catching me on the part of my brain that doesn't really need to understand. I just find this such a magnificent conversation. I mean, just talking a little bit into everything that we've heard. A symbol has been spoken about in occult teachings for thousands of years to be something that represents something, but that will never be able to fully culminate its power. And we have these 26 symbols that have been around for thousands of years that have changed ever so slightly. And these symbols create these combinations. And before they even create these combinations of words, they each have a resonance, or they have a frequency. And I spoke last time in my talk about how even in Hebrew, they had to remove certain consonants and certain vowels from sacred texts so that you wouldn't be able to embody the full power of the spell. This is so magnificent to think about these vibrations that are within each letter. Think about song, and think about chant. Just think about thousands of years of us creating particular chants to invoke, almost like one could say, code-breaking frequencies for ourselves, our bodies, our minds, our frequencies, and tone. Just think about tone in everyday life. Just think about, not only is the word important, as Himjay is saying, the word selection, but the intention behind it. And I mean, this is just such a magnificent conversation, and the discussion of prayer and manifestation. But I think the biggest, absolute question mark that sits in my head is the question that was just raised now. There has got to be, I mean, one thing I have to vehemently agree with MJ is that nearly every single esoteric culture is agreeing on one very interesting thing. We are speeding up reality. Our ability to manifest is speeding up. And because of that, what would be more at the forefront than word? But a lot of people have been in the spiritual organizations for many decades, and they'll know that this idea of shadow work has only recently started to come up. And has it come up because of the fact that we did essentially begin to spiritually bypass certain things in our quest for positivity? Whatever it was, if you look at even another thing that MJ has very deeply been involved in and that he's discussed so much with me, if you look at film essentially in the 80s and the 90s had a classic good guy, bad guy, very, very simple plot, which we found to be pretty simplistic. And now we are in the era of the anti-hero, where a person's not necessarily that good, but we can really, really relate to them, and we can understand the complexities of the human condition. And I find this so beautiful, because the query that we've been left with is essentially, in what spaces do we discuss these true shadows that are part of our consciousness and are part of this huge integration process that we are all part of? Many people have been part of sacred circles and sharing spaces where there's something very different. You can talk about the absolute lowest parts of your thoughts and your fears and perceptions, but somehow there is some sort of a mutual agreement in the group that it will not be addressed or charged or made wrong or made right. And perhaps, like what Himjay say, we are almost holding that space to agree not to energize or create that thing, but to literally just bring it into the light of consciousness. And at what point is it that we essentially start energizing those things? Now, I don't know the answers, and I think we're going to leave it as beautiful question marks. I do know that we all have certain spaces that we feel extremely released and safe to speak of those things in. So we certainly know that they have a beautiful place. And yeah, I feel absolutely inspired and in love, and this is just fantastic. If anything, I feel like we barely touched the subject, which is kind of what I hoped. Instead of being bored, I feel like I want to, etymology, just the way words are put together. You guys, like Monica said, there's probably a book on A. I can tell you now that if you just take a single word and you go and discover what different things contributed to that word? What part was Latin? What was the Latin word? What did the Greek part say? What did they say together? I will give you a mind-blowing example to close, because I like controversial things. So my closing thought before we bring any speakers in that want to share, because we still have 10 minutes left, I follow a very interesting philosopher, and more than his own ideas, he's more of a historian of philosophy, and he likes to talk very deeply about the shift of ideas and words. And he speaks in an incredible series of 4.5-hour lecture where he talks about the unseen and our perception of the unseen. But he speaks about this word obsession and possession. And he speaks about, at most of the point of history, when you translated or you looked at the root word of what we nowadays know as to be possessed, they had the word obsession. Now, they never necessarily implied that there was not something else interfering, but the actual thing was that man suffers from a frightful obsession. And at this really, really weird point in the Middle Ages, it starts to turn that we lose this word obsession, which, like I said, we're not bringing the belief of it in. We're not discussing exactly what it meant then or what it means then. And now he just points in that gradually the word changes and we begin to use the word possession. And around about this time that this word switches, through language, through translation, through the changing of English, we discover this idea that it culturally becomes far more terrifying. That if you look back even in the Greek times, that there was this very accepted thing that there were what you could even call spirits and demons, but they were, for the most part, even in ancient Chinese culture, they were a deterrent and a pain in the arse at most, and something that you just had to be aware of. And somehow when this massive change took place in language, it had this gripping fear on our psyche, and something that most people do not even wish to speak of. So there's no belief in that, but I chose that just to get us into the presence of the power of words. Whatever the truth of it is, I wouldn't dare to know. But wow, what a difference to go from the man having a frightful obsession to a man being possessed. So thank you, guys. That was absolutely beautiful. And thank you to our speakers. As I said, I found it hard to believe they didn't actually plan that. That was magnificent. I am going to ask that anyone who would like to share, I can't see everyone, so I'm going to ask if Himjay doesn't mind taking over from here and just bringing in anyone. Guys, you could literally just share a few sentences with us. You could ask one of our speakers a question. You could share a breakdown, a breakthrough. You could share something. There's no wrong or right here. And naturally, that's it. We've got about 10 minutes where we can ask a few people to share briefly with us. Thank you.
Cool. And then there's a reaction button at the bottom if you want to just give a raise a hand like that. That'll just help me know if anybody wants to ask or share anything, and then I'll ask you to unmute. Okay, go for it.
Hi MJ, it's Judy here. I just wanted to say thank you, Seana, thank you for Monica, thank you MJ and Nathan. I mean, what you guys said, it resonated with me completely. I mean, everything from the neuroplasticity, the power that we have to change our thoughts, and it's actually a magical thing that you don't realize that you've got that power to change your thoughts. And it does take time, it does take commitment, it does take dedication, and it's every day we've got to manage, keep track of those thoughts, because so quickly they can flip, and then the next minute you're stuck in a shit show and things can turn very quickly. And Monica, I also resonate with the words. I actually only learned to read a proper book when I was 27.
Wow.
And learn to love reading. I could read, but discovered the love of reading, and subsequently also the love of writing. And writing through traumatic experiences, writing good stories, you know, when I'm going through something, just learning to write that, and to, you know, it's helping me to open up my throat chakra and just to express that through words. So that's really incredibly powerful. And Himjay, I used to suffer from toxic positivity. Everything is fine, you know, it's, don't allow any negative thoughts in. There's no place for that. But the reality is, I've got to acknowledge those feelings. You've got to acknowledge them, work through them, and just keep pushing through. So thank you. That's all from me.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Judy. Cool. Does anybody else have anything they want to share or ask or anything like that? If you can just raise your hand. Or Calvin, my brother, will you unmute?
Hi, everyone. Let me just try and lower my hand. Otherwise, my arm's going to get tired. Just joking. Yeah, thank you very much for the talk. I think it was Jaco or Johan that just mentioned in the comments, this week's been a bit hectic. So this talk has been very wonderful